Hello everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. We're big, we're bad, we're back, and I'm wearing a white shirt. Okay, so I hope you're all doing very marvellously well. As ever, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, go to producelikeapro.com, sign up for the email list, get a whole bunch of free goodies. Speaking of goodies, anybody from the United Kingdom remember that? Goody, goody, yum, yum. Okay, answers on a postcard, please. Now, leave some questions and comments below. Do you remember the goodies? What was their big hit? Oh yeah, Funky Chicken, wasn't it? Was it Funky Chicken? Yeah, anyway. Okay, frequently asked questions, Friday. The first question is this. Since a lot of us home recorders don't have access to real drums, how would you mix drums if you only had software like, for instance, Easy Drummer? Okay, this is a good one. I've actually talked about this before, and I will be doing a delay video with some of these tips and tricks in it. And one of those is I'll take, for me, it's addictive drums. But for you, Easy Drummer, Superior Drummer, Slate Trigger, all of the different ones. I take that drum mix and then I have like a parallel track where I put a delay on it. It's pretty quiet. I have it down about this level, so it's just creeping underneath. And I put a random delay on it. Not an absolutely perfect 16th note, but like a so it's slightly out of time. I then wipe off all the top end. Wipe off most of the low end. So it's like a little bit of an Abbey Road kind of trick. You'll see me do it in another video. And then I distort it and I mess it up. And so it gives you kind of like a, little, I learned that from Mark Endert. Mark was mixing something I did, Jesus Mary, 2000 and blah, blah, blah. I think it was for the Aquamarine soundtrack. There was a song on there and he mixed it. And I had this super, super clean recorded drum kit. It was not Easy Drummer or Superior. It was actually a live drum kit, but it was like, it was like so straightforward. And he just wanted to create a little bit of movement. So we put this delay on it. And if you listen to the track, you don't know it's there until you mute it. And when you mute that delay, suddenly all this energy seems to disappear from the track. So it's one of those things that won't necessarily be audible as such, but if you just put in a random, dirty, distorted delay, it will randomize those perfect sounds. Another thing you can do, maybe in conjunction, is random, dirty, distorted delay with pitch change on it. Think about that. You could change it so like it's a few degrees sharp or flat, and have that also. So two delays and two different tempos, two different delays going, but in different pitches. That again will give some randomness. Another thing you can do, it's a very good trick, a Jack Douglas trick. Might put this in the video as well, Jack Douglas trick. Shelly Yakus, Jay Messina, Roy Cicala, all of those New York guys, they would take the snare and put it through a flanger, a slow flange. And that would give some randomness. Now think about a really slow, you like this? Gonna sample me doing this? Now picture like sending the snare to that with the shortest delay, and it will randomize your snare a little bit, blend it up. I'm always looking for those kind of things, little random moments to take a very straightforward, dull sounding drums and make it more interesting. So check out the video with the delay mixing tips, coming very soon. Do you generally tune the drums to fit the key of the song? Is there a difference to doing it that way as opposed to not doing it? Back in ye olden days, and that would be about 20 years ago, in the mid to late 90s, when I was making records, firstly as a musician and then secondly as an engineer and a producer, when we had the quote-unquote budget, we would hire Ross, the drum doctor. He is this is Ross Garfield. He's insanely talented. And he would come down and bring down a huge selection of drums, snares, different racks, different floors, cymbals, you name it. And then he would tune the kit perfectly, I might add, incredibly well. And then if the song was in A major, he might actually tune the snare so the ring, any ring there might be, is actually in tune with the key of the song. Now that doesn't always work. Obviously an A would work in most situations. Like if I grab this. So there's a simple chord progression that you've heard a million times before. 6, 4, 1, 5. F sharp minor, D major, A major, E. So if we wanted to go, you want to like a bing, bing, bing. It's going to work. It's going to be the suspended fourth on the E. It's going to be the minor third on the F sharp minor. It's going to be the root, of course, of the A. And on the D, it's going to be the 5. So it works in every chord perfectly except for the E. And even then, it's a nice suspension. In some ways, it's kind of nice because the suspension makes you want to resolve. My point is like, yes, it works. It does work. You can do 1, 3, 5. So basically, you could go. So you could have your snare tuned here, like with a ring there, and then have that be the rack, and that be the floor. Or, I mean, there's all kinds of things that people do. They'll tune rack, you know, bam, boom, boom, bam, boom, boom. You know, octaves. I've heard all kinds of stuff. It works. It works really well. However, be careful if the chord sequence is. I mean, it happens. People come up with crazy chord sequences that sound fantastic to serve the song. And so that's when you have to be careful if you're going to tune your drums very specifically to have an overtone. Now, obviously a potential part 2 answer to your question would be, maybe you're not necessarily talking about a tone of the drums, but you're talking about tuning them so that they're even. Yes, that is important all of the time. You know, you can take a snare drum, for instance, and a lot of guys will talk about this, a lot of girls will talk about this, and tune it evenly all round, and you get that perfect gong ring. That's fantastic. And maybe put some tape on it, dampen it down a bit. Excellent. Another trick is to tune it evenly all round, and then take one lug and just take it out. So it just kind of has this boofy sound to it. It's absolutely fantastic. Yes, I do believe tuning your drums evenly and well is of paramount importance, even if you don't have an overtone. Now, you can detune it and make it flobby and flappy and cool sounding. Of course you can. But you've got to be careful. If you don't have a good, powerful, even sounding drum, it's going to be very, very difficult to make that cut in the mix. I get a lot of things to mix where the drums are completely out of tune and it's just boom, boom, and it's just blah, blah, blah. And no matter what EQ or whatever you apply, it's never going to sound good, that rack tom all over the place with bad tuning. That floor tom with terrible tuning, that snare with bad tuning. All of those things always end up getting fixed by using a sample. And that, of course, upsets a lot of people. Glenn Fricker! So, what did I say? Anyway, next question. How would you mix a drum set that has a side snare that is only played on part of the song? Would you pan it up the middle or keep it to the drummer's audience perspective? Any considerations for miking too? That's a marvelous question. I've recorded so many drummers that use side snares. It's a really interesting question because it really depends. Are they using it in conjunction with the snare or are they using it on their own? What do I mean by that? Let's just say we've got our normal snare drum, a supraphonic here, and we've got this little baby side snare over here. So it's like over to the hi-hat side, probably like in relation somewhere where the hi-hat would live. If it's because the drummer wants to go to the side snare for a whole section of a song and wants to use a different snare, then I pan it down the center. It might not be quite right with my overheads, but the reality is it's in a different section. Now, if it's being used in conjunction with the snare, that's where I have a little bit more fun. Then I will pan it the way I see it. Now, some of you are drummers and you like panning the drum kit like a drummer. I play drums, but I would certainly not call myself a drummer. So when I pan it like I'm looking at the drum kit because I've spent more time watching drummers play than I've ever played in my life. So I would also consider it like that. So if I'm mixing and I've got the side snare being played with a snare, I'm going to pan it a little bit off, from an audience perspective at least, slightly to the right, because he or she might be going, and I like that movement between the two. My live snares down the middle, my other snares kind of, dancing around the side. So just to reiterate, point number one, if they're using it in replacement of the main snare in a section, I keep it in the middle. If they're using it in conjunction between the two snares, then I pan them slightly apart. Keep the live snare down the middle and then pan either audience or drummer's perspective slightly to the other side. And as far as miking, if it's smaller and snappier, quite often I'll put a pencil condenser on that. The Lewitt LCT 140, the 340, the Audio-Technica, the AKG 451, of course, is famous for that. And it really depends on how they've got it tuned. If they've got it like a doing, doing, like a little bright kind of reggae kind of snare, then I might actually put it more on the shell and get the whole ring of it. It's rare that I would double mic it. I might double mic it, but I think I'd prefer to put a small diaphragm condenser on it and point it down and get a whole visual of it. Small diaphragm condensers are amazing on drums. They just have more of a bleed issue than something like a 57, which has a much tighter polar pattern. I would balance it out based on what is your drummer doing. If he's smashing the hi-hat like this and the side snares here, then you're probably going to want to put a 57 on it. And in the unlikely event, you could go top and bottom, you could do that. But if they've got their side snare over here, they're lightly playing, articulating, lightly playing the hat, lightly playing the main snare, it's probably can get away with a small diaphragm condenser. So it's all about, as I like to say, horses for courses. Hope you're enjoying this. Please don't forget to hit that like button, hit the notification bell, subscribe, and go to Produce Like a Pro and get a whole bunch of free goodies. Can you explain, please, why we usually use dynamics on close miking drums and condensers further out? I thought condenser would capture transients better close up. Is it because of the sound levels? I thought condensers would mostly be okay for high SPL. Firstly, I don't know if I entirely agree with the summation. I know what you're trying to say. If I've got a snare drum and a guy, it's like a Dunnet or one of those Tamars with they're about this thick. If I've got one of those shotgun sounding snares and I put like a really precious condenser on it, it may crap out. It might distort. It's possible. You might want to pad it. But I don't know if I agree that you can't put condensers close to drums. You can. You can put them pretty close. The only reason why I like to use nice, expensive, where possible, nice, expensive U67s or 47s as overheads, we like that because they sound freaking awesome. So I put them over there and I make them in phase with my snare. I measure it to a snare. I'm only putting them there because I want the whole sound of a kit, and a condenser in that position is going to be phenomenal. I'll put a pair of condensers all the way in the back of the room to get the room sound because they sound, you guessed it, phenomenal. Now, a 57 is just a really good sounding mic on a snare drum. It's got a presence lift about 3 to 5K. It's got some nice high mids, which you guessed it, sounds good on a snare drum. However, when I've had a lot of choices of mics, I will often put 414s, that's AKG 414s, on the toms. And that's a large diaphragm condenser. And I'll put them pretty freaking close. I mean, here's your rack. I might put it here. So, you see, it's not always about some stereotypical ideas, but I understand what you're saying. I think the other thing about condensers is they tend to be a little bit more delicate, which means if the drummer is and just happens to smack that condenser, it's more likely to break than a 57 or a 421 or something like that. But my point is I would use what you've got in the best possible situation. So don't be put off if you've got 3 condensers and only 2 dynamics. Still use as condensers. I mean, for instance, a FET 47 is a favorite kick drum mic with pretty much everybody. It's one of the best kick drum mics ever. So there you go, right on the front of that head. Just put it there, get the ring of that head. Sounds phenomenal. I've even put them inside. What I find is if there's too much air going straight out on a condenser from a kick drum, maybe with a very heavy footed, a Kenny Airnoff, for instance, when Kenny's really playing like that, what can happen is you get this kind of, you get this air sound as well as picking up the drum sound. So it tends to be this kick drum with this kind of sound in it. So yes, definitely the sensitivity of a condenser on a large diaphragm in a situation like that where there's air directed at it can be an issue. However, once again, I think you can experiment, and the only time I would ever be a little worried about my condensers as if I took my 67 and put it in front of a Marshall stack, right up close with the Marshall stack, all the way at 11. No, just all turned up like super, super loud. It's probably not the smartest thing to do. Having said that, I made records with Dave Sardi, and he loves 67s on guitars, and we put them all over the place. So go figure. All I can say is obviously be careful with sound pressure levels, but logically, as the biggest thing is just don't hit your mics, and they should be okay in most situations. When you mix drums, do you prefer to EQ then compress, or the opposite? What are the pros and cons of these two methods? I typically, not always, but typically EQ into compression. I often talk about this thing behind me, the SSL 4000. There is a little button there called channel in and another little button by the side of it called channel out. When I hit channel in, it lights up green and it goes in order of the channel, which means it goes line input or mic input, it goes high and low pass filters, and then goes expander, gate, compression, and then EQ. If I hit channel out, which is yellow, it lights up yellow, suddenly that order changes and it comes out of the EQ into the compression, into the dynamics section. Why is that? Well, it sounds freaking awesome, that's why. You'll see, for instance, that there is some quite aggressive EQ on this vocal. However, that EQ is being pushed into the compressor. Why is that? It gives it the sound that we love of an SSL. It's that spankiness, that kind of pa 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 sound. It's aggressive EQ, boosted pretty heavily, being pushed back down by the compressor. And it's a fantastic sound. It's something very unique to SSL. When I, for instance, try out different SSL plugins, different SSL emulations, simulations, virtual versions, when I try them out, the first thing I do is look for the channel in and out button. Some of them don't have it. I push the channel out and I set my EQ up really aggressively and push it into the compressor. And you can tell pretty darn quickly whether that SSL sounds like a real SSL, because does it mimic that sound? Because that's the sound that we love. When I'm listening to a Peter Gabriel record and I hear that SSL sound and it's a masterpiece, that's what I like. I love that. So typically EQ into compression because I like that sound. Now, if I'm going to EQ afterwards, it's probably because I'm going to insert other things. So maybe what will happen is I'll EQ into a compressor and then I might want to compress it again. And if I do that again, I might then do a little bit more EQ and go into another compressor. It's typical that I'm always EQing into compression. But it's not to say I don't do it the other way around, but that's more correctional. That's more like, oh, I liked what's happening here, but I want to high pass it a bit. So that's where I'll put the EQ on the end, because I might want to high pass the whole signal. And then the top end, I might want to low pass it. So, that's probably where I'm going to do EQ. More about shaping, high and low passing it, and maybe pulling out some mid-range or a little bit of this or a little bit of that. But the EQ into compression is really about shaping the sound and adding that aggressive SSL-like tonality. Do you do exact delay compensation for the kick mics for the phase? Yes, I do. I use time adjuster. So I've got 3 kick drums like like this. I will take the one that's furthest back and I'll mirror it with the other 2. So if it's like 14, 15, 20, 30, 40 samples, I'll put a time adjuster on it and I'll nudge it back. And to be honest, it's so slight. The benefit of having all 3 kick drum mics in phase of each other, hitting like this with the low end, all focused, the benefit of that far outweighs the fact that now, and I know I'm going to hear this from people, what? You mean you lay back to the latest one? Yes, sometimes the kick drum is going back about 40 samples. What? 40 samples? I mean, it's such a small movement, but it can be very, very effective because you get all of that low end pumping at once. Why 2 mics on the hats? Because Dave Jordan. That's it. No. Dave Jordan absolutely frickin' rocks. Go check out his records. And once again, Dave Jordan. Dave, very good friend of mine. I met my wife through Dave. He made, well, first of all, he worked with Herbie Hancock on Rocket. He was an engineer on Remain in the Light, My Life a Bush of Ghosts. We're talking Talking Heads albums, David Byrne with Eno records. We're talking some of the best sounding records ever. Go check out the Talking Heads Remain in Light. That is An amazing sounding record. I think it's 1980? 80, 81? It's a while ago now. That is such a beautiful sounding record. And Dave did that. And I worked with him as a musician and as an engineer. And when I was working with him, he would double mic the hi-hat. He would take a 57 and then he'd take a pencil condenser, usually a 451. Now I use, Lewitt microphones, 140s or 340s. I put the two things together and then he would tape them together. Personally, I actually prefer the sound of a 57 on a hi-hat than a condenser any day of the week. It's got that kind of mid-range, which I love on a hat. You'll find that when I record hats, quite often I'll stick a lo-fi or a distortion plugin on it and take the high end and just kind of distort it a bit. I don't want my hats to be not my thing. But you have that, if you want, with the condenser, and you can blend the two together. I tend to blend them together, favoring the 57 to the condenser. Just a little bit hotter, and that gives me a great hi-hat sound. I've had many compliments, and of course, I always say, Dave Jordan, what do you send to your drum bus? Just close mics and overheads, or close mics, overheads, and room mics? I send a combination of all of it. However, for me, there's no one size fits all. I highly recommend you check out the live streams because each one of the live streams, I've mixed the drums totally differently. Strange that. And they're all recorded for the last album that I've been working on. David from the Workday Releases album was all recorded in that room with the same drum kit and the same drummer, him. So what am I doing? I'll typically, not always, take a drum mix of everything and make that come up on a pair of faders. I then might duplicate that and squash the snizzle out of it and parallel compress it underneath for just a bit of dirt, bit of grunge, a bit of energy. I might do a third one, and that third one may be taking just the kick and the snare and combining them on a drum bus. And then I might, it's getting crazy in here, take a fourth one and combine gently compressed, parallel squash to within an inch of its life, kick and snare, and bus those three to bus number 4, and then make a blend. So, and that might have an overall global EQ and compression. I tend to avoid, not always, but most 99.99999% of the time, I tend to avoid EQing buses differently. I'm not a big New York parallel bus guy. To be honest, I've spoken to the New York guys and they are completely clueless as to that, where that name came from. I don't think it came actually from them because they wouldn't EQ buses differently because they know it would cause like a kind of phasiness. So personally, I wouldn't do that. And when I spoke to Jack Douglas about it, he scratched his head and was rather confused. But they would do parallel buses. And I highly recommend whatever you're going to do EQ-wise that you mirror on the drum buses, on all of the different things. So when they combine, it's not a case of all these different mics with different compressions and EQs all confusing each other. It's very difficult to get that right. Now, of course, you could use linear phase ones on that, but then you're on the risk of like overloading your system with massive CPU uses on those linear phase plugins. I would say get your EQ right on your individual drums first, bus them together. Create a second bus, parallel the schnizzle out of it for energy, have it low. Third bus, just kick and snare. So you have control over that. You can quickly just reach for that bus and just push the kick and snare together. And those three can then, this is not always, but then can be combined to a fourth one, which is a global mix of all of them. You don't have to do exactly that. And if you watch my live streams, you'll see I did them completely differently every time. Thank you, everybody. I hope you really enjoyed that. It's wonderful to get these amazing questions every week. We scour and pick up all these great ones. And it really is informative because I get to talk about a lot of stuff just outside of like doing a controlling your low end command, and this is like, all of those kind of videos. I could get to sort of really explore the studio space. Now I get to do these fun things and talk about this stuff and share a lot of experiences. So thank you for doing that. As ever, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, go to Produce Like a Pro, sign up for a bunch of free goodies, and have a marvelous time recording and mixing.